The Curse That Keeps on Giving. Donald Trump is showing us his true nature. The US presidential election is less than a month away. As a non-US citizen, all I can do is to look on in horror at the abysmal spectacle on view in what is supposed to be the beacon of democracy in the world. In less than a decade, Donald Trump has morphed from a failed businessman to a consequential figure in American politics. A former president seeking re-election as a populist and demagogue who is on the cusp of making a remarkable comeback despite being, amongst other things, a convicted felon. Since the beginning of the year, I have tirelessly rung the alarm bells and issued a symbolic call to arms, both by self-publishing a detailed book on the topic and by developing my themes on the pages of this blog. One of my favorite quotes is from Charles Dickens, who wrote an amazing novel comparing the impact of the French Revolution on London and on Paris. The first sentence of A Tale of Two Cities is one of the most famous in English literature. It was the best of times, it was the worst of times, it was the age of wisdom, it was the age of foolishness, it was the epoch of belief, it was the epoch of incredulity, it was the season of light, it was the season of darkness, it was the spring of hope, it was the winter of despair. The notion of the best of times and the worst of times in a seemingly paradoxical duality resonates in today's turbulent world. As individuals, we can retreat from the world and follow Voltaire's example of cultivating one's own garden and pretend that everything is for the best in the best of all possible worlds. I chose a different approach, namely to comment on the chaotic world we live in and, by so doing, emphasize the values of truth, integrity, and tolerance that are the cornerstone of living together in peace and harmony. I am under no illusion that my insignificant contribution will have any real impact on current affairs. To paraphrase Governor Sarah Huckabee, not one of my role models, self-publishing a political book in Europe on the US presidential election is a very humbling experience. Nonetheless, even if one person reads my book or signs up for my website, it will be a tiny victory and a minuscule step forward in defending what I believe is essential in today's environment: the very Swiss sense of compromise, humility, and tolerance. Each and everyone is entitled to their own opinions, and I recognize that my marked political views will not be everybody's cup of tea. But ultimately, truth and facts matter, and in a period where disinformation rules the internet, it is worthwhile, methinks, to brush up on our knowledge of history and understand that although history does not repeat itself per se, it often rhymes. My 10 years living in Warsaw, Poland, have demonstrated the importance of history and the impact it continues to have on a nation's population. Whilst Warsaw is a booming megapolis, it is uncomfortably at the forefront of a potentially major fault line in European politics, less than 2 hours in all directions from Kaliningrad and its nuclear weapons, Belarus and its puppet regime, and Ukraine, where civilians continue to pay a heavy price to Russian dreams of imperial expansion. My current focus is on the forthcoming US presidential elections, as when somebody sneezes in Washington, D.C., the whole world catches a severe cold. I have a visceral dislike of extreme right-wing extremism and believe that if it looks like a duck, swims like a duck, and quacks like a duck, then it probably is a duck, albeit a team of ducks with red hats and Confederate flags on their tails, carrying tiki torches and waddling in harmony to a distinctively Wagnerian tune. However, I am not singularly obsessed with one Donald J. Trump, although it is good to understand his true nature, and hope to exchange views on a complete range of topics, such as the vitality of Polish democracy, European politics, and other such important matters. Recent events have tempered my enthusiasm and increased the urgency of my argumentation's underlying central thesis and purpose. Donald Trump is running not as an authoritarian or a wannabe dictator. He is running as an old-fashioned fascist. This statement is not made lightly, and I have justified this qualification all throughout my recent writings. Naturally, history does not identically repeat itself. Comparison runs the risk of being unreasonable and verging on false equivalence, in particular when it comes to comparing people to such an abhorrent figure as Adolf Hitler, although Trump's running mate did not hesitate to refer to him as America's Hitler. But sometimes we have to call a spade, and Trump has wrapped himself in the mantle of fascism adapted to the current times and supported by his numerous sycophants and supporters. He is redefining what it is to be a fascist in today's world. In the last days of the campaign, the man's depraved cruelty stands out. Lying is second nature to him, and he almost exclusively distorts the truth to his advantage during his rallies and staged interviews with friendly outlets. He shuns any exposure to an environment of fact-checking and accountability as he lurches toward the finishing line. We have all become so accustomed to his insanity as he constantly pushes the envelope further and further along, seeking to outmatch his own extremism with each passing statement. A careful analysis of his Truth Social messages demonstrates the degree of abject depravity he has fallen to and the extent to which he believes his propaganda is in an increasingly dangerous, vicious cycle. As usual, Trump is advancing in clear view of his opponents and not trying to disguise his intentions. His probable defeat will be attributed not to his exceptional weaknesses and faults as a human being, candidate and prospective president, but to an allegedly corrupted and rigged electoral system. He will not accept defeat, graciously or not. Although an exact repeat of January 6, 2021 is not imaginable, Trump and his enablers plan to succeed now where they failed 4 years ago. There are many ways to skin a cat. With the help of a myriad of lawyers and experts, Trump and his cabinet will assuredly come up with an alternative plan to deny the American people the results of the election if they are not in his favor. To say that such a scenario is unrealistic because the Democratic guardrail stood firm in 2021 ignores the fact that the exact same guardrails are not set in concrete, and with the continued attacks against all the institutions of American democracy over the past 4 years, coupled with a compliant Supreme Court, does not bear well for the future. Trump firmly believes in the famous adage that if at first you don't succeed, try again. The aforementioned quote of the first line of Charles Dickens' A Tale of Two Cities, or at least the first half of the sentence. To be thorough and complete, the second part of the sentence is, we had everything before us. We had nothing before us. We were all going direct to heaven. We were all going direct the other way. In short, the period was so far like the present period that some of its noisiest authorities insisted on its being received for good or for evil in the superlative degree of comparison only. Dickens wrote the seminal English novel on the French Revolution, which by definition is a period of the utmost turmoil and fundamental change that has forever marked history. The main message of his novel is to encourage his audiences to look at the past and the present with an open mind and to understand that there are always different perspectives on the same event, depending on one's vantage point and beliefs. The risk of giving too much credence to the noisiest authorities, in today's words perhaps pundits or commentators, is that exaggeration and hyperbole win the day. Let us avoid falling into the same trap. The rise of Trump and Trumpism is not irrevocably the end of the world or the apocalypse. It is the expression of legitimate concerns and fears of American voters looking for a solution to their everyday problems. It would also be wrong to dismiss Trumpism as a traditional political movement that fits quaintly into the classical political divide. Trumpism is an extreme political philosophy that preys on fear and lies, and we have to call a spade and describe the movement for what it is. By the same token, refusing to look the evil of fascism in the face and accept it in all its horror and absurdity would be a significant mistake and lead us most definitely into darkness. As a society, we must decide which future we want for ourselves, our children, and our grandchildren. The beauty of democracy is that we can determine that future, and the American people are incredibly privileged to have that essential freedom. The decision made on November 5th will have significant consequences, and all may not be resolved until the inauguration day on January 20th, 2025. Those who understand and relish the freedom to vote and the ability to decide our future will join the pro-democracy movement and will not vote for Trump. As mentioned, I cannot vote in the forthcoming election. However, it does not take a genius, or even a stable genius, to know my thoughts. Ultimately, the American people, in their infinite wisdom and their majority, both popular and in the Electoral College, will choose freedom rather than the alternative. I have faith in the American ideals and that the American people will remember that they are already a great nation and that they can build a better future with their friends and allies around the world to defend the principles that we have collectively fought for since the French Revolution and the Enlightenment, that Charles Dickens so skillfully described, and thereby defeat the depraved cruelty of Donald Trump and send him back whence he came.